Welcome. Thanks for being here. For those of you who are in the community, you know who I am, but if you're with us for the first time today, my name's Cameron Miller, and I'm from Trinity Place in Geneva, New York, and we're really glad that you're part of our worship today. This is the 12th Sunday after Pentecost, and the sermon focus is the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 16, verses 13 through 20. Which, in a way, asks the question, who am I? It's a question of identity that we face over and over and over and over again. Now, who do others say that I am? Jesus' question to the disciples will not really get us to the issue of our own identity, because identity has to do with what and who we say we are. But the question of who others say we are will rattle our world and sow self-doubt and bring us to the question of our own identity. For example, were all of you to utterly reject the authenticity of my priesthood, it would become impossible for me to serve you as a priest, and that would throw into question one of the primary ways I have of seeing myself. But the bigger question underneath what others say, of course, is what we say. Folks who study the issues of identity as part of human development suggest there are three primary questions that serve as the kind of the scaffolding for whatever it is we use to understand ourselves in relationship to others and the world around us. What do I do? Who am I with? And what is my meaning? Those are three big questions. And you would think that by the time that we're 50 or 60 or 70 or 80 or even 95, the answer to those questions would be buttoned down. But not so much, because we may feel perfectly solid, but suddenly there's a change or a loss, and that can call into question one or more of those elements of our identity. And when that happens, no matter how old we are, the earth underneath us gets squishy. For example, maybe we're in a long-term marriage that has navigated all kinds of changes when suddenly our financial security crumbles, or the health of one of the people in the relationship deteriorates, or both people respond very differently to the same terrible loss or change. That instability can cause one or both people to call into question one or more of those frames of identity. What do I do? Who am I with? What is my meaning? Or maybe we've had a long career or professional association or job, or even a very long time volunteering somewhere. And whatever it is we did, it was tremendously important to our sense of self-identity. Even more so if we wore a uniform every day, like military or clergy or nurses or police. But then we retired or stopped doing it either by choice or by fiat. Who are we anymore? How will people know who we are and what it means to be us? If we no longer have a cohort of others we work with every day, who are we with? If I'm not working or volunteering, what is the meaning and the purpose of my life? So you see, these are simple, ordinary things that people do and go through every day. And yet, they are simple, ordinary things that can wreak havoc on our sense of identity. Again, those lofty folks who study these things say that when one or more of these three realms of self-identity are called into question, it instigates a crisis. When two or more of them are challenged, look out, it's a big identity crisis. So death, failure, struggle, change, loss, even sudden success, all of them can upend and bring us to moments of reckoning. And whenever or wherever the tectonic plates below the surface of our lives move and shift and rumble, we will wobble for balance. Now, a paradigm shift that takes place around us will also rattle the bones of our identity. And we have been going through one paradigm shift after another for decades now. A paradigm is a template or a prototype by which we operate. All those assumptions, for instance, that I was talking about last week, form a lens through which we perceive the people and the events of our lives. We're generally unaware of our paradigms until something happens to crack them open. So, for example, a common paradigm in many Christian churches is that God rewards the good and punishes the bad. But that paradigm can suddenly crack very badly when someone we love dies. Any tragedy shreds a paradigm like that, as we suddenly are left to question and wonder if God actually punishes or rewards anyone or anything. Likewise, loss or change can call into question the meaning of our faith and whether it's true and substantial. And of course, any tragedy can call into question who we are with and what kind of care or support they have or can give us. Seismic shifts are taking place in our corporate thinking and shared perceptions, just as they always have among our species. We were, after all, once hunters and gatherers who became hunters and farmers, who became farmers and manufacturers, who became then manufacturers and finally morphed into information technologists. This pandemic is calling into question the wisdom of a service economy with a supply chain that is spread halfway around the globe. So whatever happens, I'm guessing that our economy and our economic culture will change significantly in many ways. So it's no surprise then that religion is going through a whopper of a paradigm shift. So many, in fact, shifts that sometimes it feels like our fuselage is rattling apart on our way to a crash. But that's nothing new either. When we often erroneously think of Christianity as this imperial religion, a kind of massive, a religion of massive cathedrals and ornate riches with a monolithic history. But our religion is a history of one major shift after another, after another, after another. The first big shift that we almost never talk about was when the paradigm went from being followers of Jesus to the leaders of a resurrection cult. Now, did you know that the word church only appeared in any of the four Gospels twice, and both in Matthew? And don't you think that's odd when we are so accustomed to thinking of Christianity as church, making them synonymous? I mean, really, for millions and millions and millions of people, church is the paradigm of Christianity. But church was not a familiar paradigm to Jesus and his followers. And in fact, ecclesia, which is the Greek word we translate as church, only meant, in Jesus' day, it only meant an assembly, a gathering. It was a generic word that referred to people called together for a specific purpose. So as a matter of fact, the group of Roman soldiers called together to crucify Jesus was an ecclesia, a church of executioners. So when Matthew has Jesus say, "You, Peter, the rock on whom my church is built," we hear it from our paradigm of church. But whatever image or idea of church we carry, it surely is not the one that Matthew had in mind. And to be honest, we do not know what Matthew or Jesus or Peter would have meant by the word church, because the paradigm has changed so many times and so radically since this story was first told. We have no idea, in fact, what church actually meant to the people who first heard these stories. Now, I raise this gnarly truth about the meaning of church because the pandemic is provoking a long simmering identity crisis for us and for our institutions. And by the way, just to raise another gnarly truth, we also do not know what Peter meant by Messiah. When he answered Jesus' identity question, like the word church, Peter used a word that meant something much different from what we mean by it, or what has been meant by it for most of our history. Messiah, of course, is the word we translate as Christ, and it's a title, not a name. So the word Messiah evoked a Jewish paradigm for a servant of God. And yet, Messiah had multiple meanings to divergent groups of Jews over a good many generations before and after Jesus. For example, all the ancient kings of Israel were considered messiahs because the word means literally anointed one. The kings and the queens and the prophets of Israel were all anointed for that position or that vocation, and usually with oil. So in that sense, to say Jesus Christ is to say Jesus, oily head. The concept of Messiah included the idea of a human being anointed by God to lead a successful rebellion against the Roman Empire and who would install an authentic leadership to the temple and the throne. And at the same time, some groups quivered in anticipation of a supernatural figure who would launch a new age and begin a new era, a kind of new Adam. This godlike figure would bring holy wrath upon oppressors and sinners alike and elevate the poor and the pure to the highest stature in the new creation. The title Messiah could mean any and all of those things and more: purely human, an earthly or heavenly warrior, a supernatural godly judge, literally dozens of paradigms. The sheer volume and intensity of ideas surrounding the title of Messiah makes it impossible for us to know what Peter meant and believed when he said Jesus was the Messiah. Which one, Peter? Which Messiah did you say he was? So, we're having an identity crisis. Fewer and fewer people are interested in the church paradigm because of a paradigm shift that's happening in the greater culture. The church paradigm that we have shifted away from the church paradigm actually shifted away from the Jesus paradigm, and it became the church paradigm. And the church was then gobbled up by the Roman Empire, and the church paradigm shifted again to become an imperial paradigm. But the imperial paradigm of church shifted again and took on the culture and political paradigm of colonialism. That crumbled and is crumbling, and we have seen the church paradigm now splinter into thousands of different paradigms, many, if not most of which are failing now on their way to something new. Who do others say that we are? That's kind of a terrifying question to ask because of the clergy sexual abuse problem, and because of anti-science and anti-evolution craziness, and because of evangelical fervor for binary thinking about the Bible, declaring it's all factual or none of it's true. Heck, I bet that most of us would be hard-pressed to come up with a clear and distinct response to the question of church identity. And that's because we have an identity crisis. What do we do? Who are we with? What is the meaning of this? The pandemic has separated us and limited what we can do. It has isolated us and thinned our sense of community. It has caused us to wonder about the meaning of church and our baptismal practice when we cannot be together and demonstrate our love of God in what seems like meaningful ways. Who are we with? What is our meaning? So, I want to offer a very uncharacteristically clear answer to that question. And it's this: the Lord's Prayer. Underneath the hulking ruins of the church metaphor is buried the still, fresh, and breathing body of the original followers of Jesus paradigm. That paradigm has everything to do with our passionate pursuit of the Lord's Prayer. Make it heaven here. Make it heaven here. Who we are as followers of Jesus, who we are with as participants in spiritual community, and the meaning of our ministry together and apart has everything to do with how we embody that prayer, becoming agents of God to make heaven and earth become one. In that prayer, Jesus pleads, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." In other words, make it heaven here. Make it heaven here. Or, as the Message version renders it, do what's best, as above, so below. Or in the New Zealand version, your commonwealth of peace and freedom sustain our hope and come on earth. Or in the Parker Palmer version, let heaven and earth become one. The paradigm embedded in that prayer tells us what we and this spiritual practice of ours is all about. Making heaven out of earth, nothing less. It's not only our prayer, it's our paradigm. Our long ago forgotten paradigm of what it means to be followers of Jesus. It got buried beneath the church paradigm that was all about building an institution and beautiful buildings and extravagant and hip ways to worship. But none of that helped to make earth heaven. And in fact, sometimes it contributed to making earth hell. Well, the pandemic is a two-edged sword. It's creating a crisis, of course, in death and pain and suffering. And it is challenging our sense of identity and meaning. And at the same time, it holds the potential to bring about a paradigm shift that has been trying to bloom for years and years. Whether it's our personal identities or that of our spiritual communities, a dedicated openness, a dedicated opening of the mind and the heart to asking the questions, along with an authentic willingness to listen to what comes, will offer healing and renewal. So, stuck in our homes, with a smaller social circle than ever, working on greater openness to the paradigm shift taking place is worth spiritual gold. And considering also a new paradigm for Christianity, one like making it heaven here, is priceless. Well, thank you for listening, and thank you for thinking about it. Peace be with you.